Hi there, I'm Brian. This is my photo show. Welcome. Today's topic, first generation Nikon autofocus lenses. Prime lenses, that is. Here's what you need to know. We'll start with the 20mm f2.8 right here. The 20mm f2.8 Af Nikkor is the same optical formula as its manual focus predecessor, the 20mm f2.8 AIS. Why you would need autofocus for a wide angle lens, I'm not sure. I bought this back in the time when everybody was updating to autofocus, so I followed the crowd and did likewise. But functionally, why you would need autofocus in a 20mm lens, I'm not certain. At any rate, it's just as good or just as bad as the 20mm f2.8 AIS. So if you're shopping around for one, pick the better price, whether it's autofocus or not. You really don't need autofocus at 20mm. Next, let's take a look at the 24 and the 28. I want to look at these side by side for one reason. First generation Nikkors come in two flavors, D and non-D. The original autofocus lenses were simply called Af Nikkor, as you can see here. And along the side of the lens here also it simply says 24mm 1:2.8. Later the Af Nikkors were updated with a D. For example, you can see here this 28mm says 28mm 1:2.8D, and there's also a D after the 1:2.8 here. So what is that D there for? D means distance. And it indicates that the lens is communicating to the camera's microprocessor information pertaining to the distance between the subject and the lens. This supposedly is helpful with flash photography in some situations. It is the general consensus that in 99% of all situations the D is worthless, and in the one situation where it does make a difference, it's not a big difference. If you do a great deal of flash photography, it may be worth looking into. Other than that, the D really doesn't do anything at all with any functional value. Okay, getting back to the 24mm. Let's put this to the side for the moment. 24mm 2.8. I'm very happy with it. No difference between the D and non-D version. Nice little lens. However, do you really need autofocus at 24mm? Here is a 24mm f2.8. This is a pre-AI lens with a proper AI conversion. Pay attention, not all AI conversions are created equally. I've done a separate video on that. Likewise, if you're shopping for pre-AI lenses, please make sure to get one or look for that C. The C indicates multi-coating. It's worthwhile figuring out what this information will tell you on pre-AI lenses. I've done a separate video on that as well. So these are different optical formulas, and the newer one is better. I mean, it's sharper. It's a sharper, better optical formula, but not by that much. It is definitely sharper in the corners, particularly at open apertures. But if you stop down a little bit, you're going to be hard pressed to tell the difference between these two lenses. You'll need to do some serious pixel peeping to really see the difference. So you're looking at one lens goes for about $250 and the other one goes for about $125. So if money's an issue for you, if $100 is meaningful to you, this ought to do just fine in most situations. However, for the same amount of money, or about the same amount of money, you can get yourself one of these, my personal favorite 24mm lens. This is the Nikkor 24mm f2. This happens to be the AIS version, and I'm really, really happy with this lens. I really love the way it renders. It is certainly as sharp as the autofocus 2.8, and for about the same amount of money. I mean, for the same price, would you rather have an extra stop of aperture, or would you rather have autofocus? If you really need a computer to help you focus a 24mm lens, then perhaps you should rethink photography as a hobby. That's all I'm saying. Okay, let's move on to the next focal length, which would be 28. All right, 28mm is one of two focal lengths where the D matters. The original AF Nikkor 28mm f2.8 was merely an AF version of the Series E 28mm lens, 5 elements in 5 groups. At some point later, Nikon thought better of that idea and updated the formula to this 6-element version. However, having said that, this one's sharper. This is the 28 2.8D, 6 elements. This is the 28 f3.5. I have shot these side by side for comparison tests several times. This one is sharper. It is certainly possible that I just got a bum sample of the 28-2.8. That's certainly possible. It is possible that the previous owner, dropped it and slightly decentered an element. I don't know. But as far as this specific lens versus this specific lens, this one's sharper. And the 28-3.5 is one of the best deals in photography, period. These things, you can get them all day long between $60 and $70 in tip-top shape. You can't beat that deal with a stick. And at least as far as these two samples go, this one's better. Okay, moving on. Moving on to the, let's see, 35 millimeters. Okay, 35 millimeter f2. 35 millimeter f2. Everybody loves this lens, myself included. If you own a Nikon camera, get this lens. The first generation AF lenses all have physical aperture rings, so you can use them on your old manual focus film cameras. They are screw drive lenses. That is, they do not have internal focusing motors like new modern autofocus lenses do. Rather, a physical screw penetrates from the camera into the lens to drive the autofocus. So the 35 f2, excellent lens, 6 elements in, I think it's 6 and 6 groups. It is a different optical formula than the manual focus version. The manual focus 35mm f2, whether it's pre-AI or AI, was an 8-element lens. This one's 6. Not that I'm saying there's nothing wrong with the old 8-element version. I don't own one. I've never owned one because I have this. So, why bother, right? But plenty of people love the old 8-element 35-2s. But I've never heard a bad review of this one. I've never heard anybody say an unkind word about the Nikkor 35mm f2 autofocus lens. If you own a Nikon camera, get one. However, it does have a fatal flaw. Basically, you need to store it upside down or else you're going to get oil on the blades. I have done a separate video on that. Please see that video if you own or are thinking of buying a 35mm f2 autofocus Nikkor. Okay, moving on to 50 millimeters. This is a 50mm f1.4. I used to own a 51.8. I don't own one now. The 50mm f1.8 autofocus Nikkor is, or AF Nikkor, is the AF version of the Series E Pancake 50mm f1.8, optically identical to the Pancake. Now, having said that, there is a rather passionate dispute amongst some hardcore Nikon enthusiasts about which is the truly superior 50mm f1.8 Nikkor. Is it the Series E, the AIS, the Japan-only market version, the AF version? I'm not going to wade into that pool. For $100, it's a great lens. The 51.8 AF lenses go for $100 or less in really nice condition. If you wish to engage in the philosophical debate over which 50mm f1.8 is the true heir of linen, then please be my guest. I'm not interested. This is the 50mm f1.4, and it is, as far as I can tell, optically identical to the AI version of the 50mm f1.4. All right, the only difference between these two lenses, other than the autofocus aspect, the AI version should have more lead in the glass than the AF version, and the AF version should have incrementally better anti-reflective coatings. Generally speaking, anti-reflective coatings improved gradually over time, so a newer lens is going to have slightly better anti-reflective coatings than an earlier lens. Also, at some point, I believe in the 1990s, the major manufacturers, Nikon included, began withdrawing lead from their optical glass for environmental reasons, not for optical reasons. So, if you're like me and you like your lenses chock full of lead, get the AI series or the pre-AI series. Although, in all candor, I doubt there's really much of a difference between these two. You will probably have to engage in some pretty serious pixel peeping to discern the difference. The optical formula is the same, 7 elements in 6 groups. It's the same winning formula that Nikon's been using since 1977. And in fact, both of these lenses are still in production. The manual focus is in production as an AIS, or I think AIP, because it's got the the CPU contacts in the rear. And the AFD version is definitely still in production. Although why you would buy them new, I'm not sure. You can get it for half price used, so what the heck. Anyway, moving onwards. The Micro Nikkor 60mm f2.8. Again, no difference between the D and pre-D versions. I'm very happy with this lens. It consistently receives favorable reviews. Is it sharper than its predecessor, the 55mm f2.8 AIS? No clue. I've never owned the AIS version. I don't do all that much macro work, so I cannot offer an opinion on that. What I can tell you is that I'm very happy with this lens. It's very highly thought of, very favorably reviewed. Wherever it is reviewed, it gets good marks, and it's not expensive. So you're not wasting your money. You are most certainly not wasting your money by purchasing one of these. Last but not least, the 85mm f1.8. This is the other lens where the D is meaningful. Okay, in the 28mm, there's this change in the optical formula between the D and the D and the pre-D. It went from 5 elements to 6. The 85-1.8, the optical formula did not change. However, there is one functional aspect of this lens which was altered with the D version, and it has to do with the rear focusing mechanism. If you see, as I focus the lens, a gap opens up between the rear element and the internals of the lens. So the concern is that this gap can attract dust. Okay? The gap was fixed with the D version. D versions do not have that gap. The D version lens is sealed. This one is not. Now, having said that, theoretically, this lens should be sucking in dust, right? Well, I've used this lens extensively for years, and it does not have any more internal dust than any other lens I own that I've used, with similar degree of use, put it that way. So don't change lenses in a sandstorm. You should do okay. But although if the sealing issue, the gap issue is really important, then just buy the D version. There's really not much of a price difference between the D and pre-D version in this focal length, as far as I can tell, as far as I'm aware. All right, that about wraps it up. The only other prime lens in the first generation AF that's missing here would be the 180, but I've never owned one, and I don't know what, I've got nothing to say about that because I've never owned one. Okay, that'll do. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. If you did, then please check out my self-published book on Amazon, Nikon Film Cameras, Which One is Right for You? $3 worth of knowledge, guaranteed. Thank you much. See you next time. Bye-bye.